Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Business of Higher Ed podcast. My name is David Fox. We're very fortunate to be welcoming Jason Gulya. Jason is a professor of English at Berkeley College in New Jersey. He is the chair of the Artificial Intelligence Academic Integrity Committee, member of their AI task force. He is a lecturer at Union College in New Jersey. He is a mentor for the AI Institute of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, contributing writer on AI and education for vktr.com. Highly sought after, which is understandable based on all that experience and expertise. Highly sought after consultant and speaker, helping colleges, professors, school districts, and students optimizing their use of AI. AI has shown tremendous potential in a whole variety of areas. Any school is in one way or another wrestling with what AI is to that school, how they're going to use it. Again, returning to the business of education, what have you seen or what do you think in terms of how AI can improve student recruitment, student retention strategies, maybe through predictive analytics, targeted marketing? What are you seeing in that front?
Yeah, one of the things that I think is so interesting about how colleges and universities work, and a lot of this depends on the kind of college that it is, where it
Mm,
is, and what it's competing with, right? What the surrounding colleges are.
yeah.
One of the things that I've started to see is there is a sort of split. So to think about the classroom, I think for a lot of colleges, they're not quite on the strategy part yet. I think there are a lot of reasons for this. I think classrooms and professors kind of do their own thing. They have their own silos. And depending on the discipline, there may be a lot of skepticism towards this technology. So I'm a professor of English, and I would say that if you needed to look for a place, a department where AI is inherently controversial, that's where it is. In any
Yeah,
individual
yeah.
English department, you go in, you mention AI, you can feel the room change. You'll have faculty who will push it aside and say, absolutely not. There will be no AI in my classroom. There will be no AI in my assessments, in my assignments. So you have that, and then you have others that have adopted it, that have really worked it into the core of their programs. And then you'll see most people will be in the middle. And so I think that we have that. So we have academics not really getting in general on the side of thinking about it strategically. But I will say that on the other side that you mentioned, in terms of recruitment, in terms of reaching out to students, there is, I would say in general, much less skepticism towards this technology because colleges have a ton of data. They have so much data. They have data about students, they have data about recruitment and everything else. And one of the big obstacles has been going through it. That colleges are
Mm.
really good at having data, in general,
Ah,
really, really struggle with what to do with it, what it means. And I think that this is where, for a lot of colleges, AI seems especially promising. What do you do? How do you start to plan and think through things when you just have a mountain of data that you just cannot go through? Colleges are, and college employees are so overworked. They're doing all these different things. And so having AI as a part of that process seems to be where a lot of colleges are going. That's where they're starting to think about it strategically. And basically every college I talk to, especially when it comes to admissions and recruitment and retention, recognizes that things are already incredibly competitive. And
yeah.
they're just going to get more and more competitive. And I mean, we're going to see whether it happens exactly as predicted, but in the US, especially, they're expecting an enrollment cliff right
Right,
around 2026, which is right around the corner. We're right there.
right.
And it may have
Yeah.
been pushed a little bit earlier. We have now less students going to college. We have less high school students, right? Part of it is just a population thing. And so I
Hmm.
think many colleges are in the space where recognize they have to start thinking strategically. Because if
Hmm.
you, say, are a small private institution, you have to improve the way that you recruit. You have to improve who's seeing your ads. You have to improve conversion rates so that if a student sees an ad or interacts with the chatbot or whatever it is, you want that technology to be up to speed because that's going to be like the front line. I think that when I went to college, and I'm not that old, they had college recruitment fairs. You literally
Yeah,
went to college
yeah.
and you would talk, or you actually might go to a place with multiple colleges. You walk around, you meet them. And so for me, my first interaction with people from, I applied to NYU and BU and Rutgers, and my first interaction with those institutions was person to person. I went and talked to them,
Yeah.
and that is becoming, less and less the case that
Mhm.
a lot of recruitment is going through chatbots as a first stage, right? And it's about how to improve that as much as you can so that you can actually compete for that student. Because again, I think it's just going to get more and more competitive. And I think that you have the enrollment cliff, but then you also have AI. And one of the big questions with AI and generative AI is what purpose do colleges even serve? Right? And you also have the devaluation of the college degree for various reasons. You now have more and more jobs that may not require that associates or that BA or that master's. And that has sort of shifted too. And so I think all of that has put a lot of pressure on recruitment and also just retention. One of the things that, depending on the college again, a college might not be especially good at is retaining students. Right?
Yeah.
Once they're matriculated at their institution, once they're going to classes, once they're a part of your
Yeah.
institution, how do you
Yeah.
how do you keep them there? I
Right.
mean, attrition for a lot of colleges is really, really bad. And so for
Yeah.
some colleges, that was it was a part of pride, right? That you go
Yeah.
to some of the big institutions and there are
Look
two
to your
real sense.
left, look to your right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That sort of thing. There are two really big sources of pride. One was how few people got in. That was a source of pride. We only take 10% of our applicants. Look how awesome we are, especially Ivy Leagues. That's part of the marketing, part of the brand. And then the other side of it is, yeah, look to your left, look to your right. One of those people will not graduate, right? Or something like that. And
Hmm.
so it's sort of built into the culture. And so I think one of the things that'll happen is I think will happen is we'll start to see these cultures start to change. As students, you need to sell a student on the value of education. Like you do. And I don't think this was the case, at least not to the same degree 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. You need to say that there's a reason why you are here, and here is the reason, because you can't just take that as a given. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. Like, why go to college in this new world? Why is it important? Why not just sit there, spend $20 a month for ChatGPT Plus or whatever it is, and use it as an AI tutor and learn whatever you want, and then go out into the workforce? Why not just do that? And that's something that I think my students are starting to think about, or students in general are starting to think about, but it's early stages. I mean, I think that that's going to amp up even more, I think, over the next few years.
This idea of finding the right students for the right schools. It's not just saying, hey, you should go to college. It's, are you the right student for this school? Because we talk about
Yeah.
recruiting, retention. If you're not the right student for the school, you're not going to stay, and
Yeah.
it's likely you're not. It's less likely that you're going to find, success socially, academically, etc. So how do we figure that out? How do we merge that into
Oh,
AI?
I was just gonna say that I think that there are a couple of things going on. I think that one is, yes, you want to make sure there's a good match between the student and the institution. It serves the student best, it serves the institution best. You want to get a student who it makes sense for that. And then the other thing that's made it so complicated is now if you're a high school student who really is interested in college, your options are much less geographically specific. that for any individual institution, it used to understand that, oh, if we have this student, we have student A, they might go here. So I went to Rutgers. So you talk to people who were trying to recruit me and like, yeah, okay, so we're competing. So Rutgers is competing with TC&J. Maybe we're competing with Middlesex County College. Maybe we're competing with NYU. Maybe the student wants to go to New York. And like even there, you have this kind of circle in your mind. That student
Mhm.
might go to New Jersey, might go to New York, maybe Boston. We'll see. Like you try to like figure out what
Mhm.
is the pretty finite set of institutions that you're competing with. And that is no longer the case. I mean, especially since the pandemic, so many colleges and universities have a very healthy set of online courses. So at my
Mhm.
institution, we're getting close to 50-50. About 50% of our classes are in an actual classroom and 50% of them are online. And so for any of my classes, right now, I have students in New Jersey, I have students in Tennessee, I have students in California, I have students in Lebanon, I have students like all in all these different locations. Um,
Mhm.
and so that is such a relatively new challenge if you're on the recruitment side. And it really does sort of
Yeah.
change. And that's where I think AI can be very, very powerful because without it, I think that's really, really complicated.
Yeah.
Um, and especially because if you are in an institution and you're on the side of recruitment, you're going to have a very finite budget, right? And one of the best ways to really manage that budget is to be very, very targeted with how you're using AI, because you're
Yes.
not going to be able to cover everything. That if you have information, if you have materials going to a student that you want to come to your college, you want it to be accurate. You want it to be good, right? On the AI
Yeah.
side in terms of information. And so there's a lot of incentive to have some sense of how this technology works,
Mhm.
because who you're competing with, right? The institutions you're competing with has expanded so much over the last few years.
What international education, what education looks like generally. I mean, we're shifting very, very quickly, and but institutions, including the recruiting and retention, they need to be very nimble with this because this they've got to figure out a way to make this go. You're an instructor, you're in the classroom. Um, what role can AI play in identifying and supporting at-risk students, uh, not only to improve retention rates, but also to proactively, proactively identify and help students in terms of finding their own success, finding how they learn, um, uh, helping them manage stress and mental health, helping them see that they do have value and that they can do things that they thought they couldn't. So, what are you seeing in terms of AI and identifying and supporting at risk students?
So this is one of the things that I think is sort of exciting about AI. I think some of the best uses of AI are where time really, really matters.
Oh,
That's where AI really does help. And so you mentioned the recruitment side. You're right. If you're a college, you're competing with other colleges. If you have that first message in there, certainly that first human contact, that is a huge, huge plus. There's something about that that just gives you, a much better chance of getting that student. And student support is another one of those things that if we let a student get to the point, so if you have a 15-week course and you're reaching out to the student, say week 6, and notice that
yeah,
they're struggling, there is a huge difference
yeah,
between that and coming in say week 2 and just saying,
yes,
well,
yeah.
kind of noticed you need some help with something like that. And it's very easy to say that this is the job of the professors, and to a certain extent it is, but I think we need to recognize how overwhelming that gets very, very quickly. I'm lucky enough to be at a pretty small institution, so most of my classes are capped at about 25 students. So it's somewhat feasible. Although even that, if I'm teaching 6 courses at a time, that balloons pretty quickly, and things slip by, right? Sometimes you just think a student is on track, and you go back, week 4, week 5, and think, oh, actually, they're sort of struggling with it a little bit more. And That's where AI can very, very much help. And also, and this is going to sound a little bit weird, so I'll kind of walk through this. I actually think, in terms of student support, AI can actually help us be more nuanced rather than less if we approach it in a certain way. So, if you were, oh, I'll make this personal. So me, if I'm teaching one of my classes, and if I'm going to find a student who's struggling, so for various reasons, so someone who's classified as at risk, either they're struggling with the material or there's something personal happen, the
Hmm.
only real way that I know is that they don't submit things. That's
Mm.
really, really it. If you're talking about week 5, week 6 of a semester, those are the students that stick out to you. Not necessarily the ones that, oh, you're really having a hard time on the level of writing or on the level of critical thinking, whatever. We might have those students, but if you're talking about week 5 or week 6, they maybe their grade has come down to a B, right? Or a C plus. It might not be on your radar because the
Hmm.
people on your radar are the ones with a 7, right? Because they submitted one thing or whatever it is. And so I do think that if we have AI embedded, obviously ethically within these student support systems, I do think that we can make that much, much better. That we can actually see on the level of personal support, how can we help that student? Because colleges are giant institutions, obviously, or most of us. Even the small ones are pretty big. And they have all these things that are sort of preset for students. And they're asked to take certain courses. They have to take certain requirements that are put in these kind of neat boxes, or they have to do X, Y, and Z. And I think anything that we can do to personalize support for students, and catch those issues a little bit earlier and help them out, I think that's going to really, really help them. Because one of the things that has increasingly happened over the last 5 to 10 years is the widening of a gap between students, that
Mm.
even if you work at a particular institution and you're teaching a class, and everyone went through the same kind of hoops to get there, right? They went through the same admission process, say they have even the same test scores, whatever they are, you might notice a very wide variety in abilities. And that's always been a challenge, but I think that that has come up even more and more because I teach English and writing. So on the level of literacy and reading and writing, there's always a huge gap. In one of my classes, I might have a student who wants to be a professional author, and I'll have another student who really cannot read. They really cannot make sense of the words on the page, and you will be asked to navigate them. And so I do think that's where AI can really, really help, right? Provide that scaffolding. Because we all want to say personalize all the scaffolding, but practically that's really, really hard to do. Um,
Mhm.
and there are ways that AI makes that easier, right? Approached in certain ways. And so I think a lot of what AI can do is help us identify those at-risk students and think about it in a more supportive way. Um, because the other kind of flip side of using AI at institution at a college is that there are ways that, again, if we approach it in certain ways, they can even be more supportive, right? So personal interaction, human connection is essential. But sometimes, so if I'm talking to a student, I'm a professor. There's nothing I can do to shed my role as a professor. I always have positional power in that interaction. I'm who grades them. I'm who decides if they go to the next step. So
Mhm.
having something else, even as if it is an AI bot, um, and especially if that AI bot is being used by, say, a career counselor or advisement or whatever it is, wherever that's coming from, that can really, really help the student. And it gives us a multifaceted approach so that a student has this support system, this consistent support system that isn't just the professor. Because
Mhm.
again, in a
Yeah.
student's mind, I like to think that I'm welcoming. I like to think that I'm
Right.
supportive, but I'm
Right.
also who's going to hand them a grade. And if
Yep.
someone's going to fail them, it's going to be me. And again, like there's
Yeah.
nothing I can do to get rid of that. So having this other form of support, I think could be very, very helpful if we approach it in a certain way.
What I'm seeing in terms of the students in the classes that I'm in is just such, not only academically, but personally, mental health wise. skills wise, such a huge dis, you know difference from one student to the next. And that's not to say that one student isn't going to just be fine in life, and uh, but yeah, it is. And like you said, how much time can you spend with that student who really needs a lot of hand holding, a lot of help in terms of writing? Because good writing, as far as I'm concerned, means rewriting, right? So yeah, I would hope as well with the AI, as you said, we see different academic levels. We're more proactive with that, but we're also more proactive with identifying uh, maybe undiagnosed learning disabilities at some point, or things that
Yeah.
point towards certain neurodiversities. Now, and again, we get into the ethics there, but you know, particularly when you're talking about international students, you you may not be getting all the information about their previous academic experiences. Um, okay, so I'm going to finish it off with this question. Actually, I'm going to have one other question after this, but this is so we're on the Business of Higher Ed podcast. How can, in your opinion, or what trends are you seeing? How can AI support institutions in developing innovative programs and delivery models that align with the changing workforce needs, targeting the different demands and values of different student groups, but also, so the big question, optimizing financial management, resource allocation, and operational efficiencies? Because in this time, you got to do both. You got to be able to do both. So, what are you seeing? What is your opinion in terms of that question?
Yeah, so I'm going to approach it in kind of different ways and different layers. So at my college, I'm a part of creating our applied media program. And
Mm,
so that is a program that has an AI powered communication course built within it. I designed it. I'm actually updating it now. And then we also have AI embedded within that program, within that course. So we're thinking about designing an art of collaboration course. And one of the things that we just talked about recently was how different collaboration is, because it's not just collaborating with humans we're going to think about. We're going to think about hybrid collaboration. What does it mean
mhm.
to work with agents? What does it mean to work with a human and a chatbot and whoever else or whatever else, depending on the approach? And so I think that in many ways encapsulates one aspect of this, which is sort of traditional programs, right? The applied media program is sort of traditional in the sense that we have set courses, we have the ones that are mandatory, the required ones, and then we have the optional ones, the electives, and we sort of design that and we adapt it as we go along based off of the market. And then the other thing I think is going to happen is, and I'm starting to see these, but I think that it's going to be sort of surprising what they look like, really experimental programs, right?
Hmm.
Really different approaches, different models of doing it. I think we are going to see fully personalized majors. We sort of had this, I think NYU's had one for a long time, right? And things like that when you could design your entire major. But I think that we're going to see the scaling of that, the scaling of that model. And right now, we're going to an environment where our students are expecting different things from their
Right.
college than what I expected. If
Right.
I were taking
Yes.
a class when I were an undergraduate and I sent an email to my professor, my expectation was that I would hear back within 2 weeks. And I'm serious. Within 2 weeks, we did not have an LMS. We were printing things out and handing in
Yeah.
papers.
Yeah.
And if I
Yeah.
didn't get an email back within 2 weeks, I'd email them a follow-up and things like that. It might actually be, 2 to 4 weeks before I heard back from them. That's dead, right? That idea
Oh
is
yeah.
dead.
No. No.
That
Yeah.
professors really want some ideally immediate, certainly within 24 hours. And I think that we're seeing a shifting expectations also in terms of what our programs can look like. And again, I think this is the pressure that's going to push for innovation, right? And I think that we're not even at the point where we're seeing a lot of these. I think we're starting to see them, but personalized programming or programming that is much more fluid, much less fixed than what we are
Mhm.
used to. Maybe I actually have started to see this, an institution where a student can join the college at any time at any time. Maybe you have a model of an institution where you don't just come in the fall, you don't just come to start coming to class in September and leave in May. Maybe at any time of the year, you decide, whatever, it is December 3rd. You know what? I kind of want to go to college. You go in that day. Right. And I think that we're
Right.
going to start seeing that. We'll see these very innovative approaches. And then I think it'll be a matter of what they can look like. And also, the big bugbear here is what is that going to look like for accreditation? Right. And that's something that also it is, and I understand why it is shifting so slowly in terms of what can you do as an institution and still be accredited? Because I would love to be an optimist. I love to just have my head in the clouds. But in the end, not getting accreditation for an institution is a death sentence. They're going to do whatever they can to make sure they are accredited. Otherwise, they
Yeah.
will not compete for students. They will not have the resources, state and federal. They will not be viable without accreditation. Um,
Mhm.
and it'll be interesting to see when and how that starts to develop, that starts to change. But I do think it will see more and more innovative, not just programs, but innovative models of programming. I think that's going to be something that will be
Mhm.
really interesting to see how institutions can do that and still keep accreditation, right? And that's going to be a very difficult balance for some institutions. Like, how innovative can you be within the space? Because there are limits, there are parameters, I guess I'll say, that can limit the amount of innovation you can do. And there are reasons for them, right? There are reasons
Mhm.
that they're safeguarding students. There are reasons they are in place.
Mhm.
But it is a big factor. So I think that now, over the next couple of years, we'll see innovation that's sort of like what we're doing, which is how can you create sort of a traditional looking program, but one that you can adapt and is thinking about these developments, AI and otherwise. But then I think eventually we are going to see those other models. And when we have those models, I think AI is going to be really embedded in them. And not just on the side of choosing courses, which is relatively simple. That's sort of the easy part, right? But in terms of all of the background stuff, right? And this is where we get to finances. This is where we get to budgetary things. This is where we get to really streamlining it because I have a lot of respect for colleges. And I think that we have a really, really important social role. But
Mhm.
from my experience, we suck at efficiency. I'll just say that we really, really struggle with that. And the
That took a
fact that
left turn there.
I know, yes, right. That this is something, when you have these programs that if they use AI in a certain way, actually can, on the operational side, really improve that. That could be really huge for institutions because, really, practically speaking, colleges have gotten so expensive. So my wife went to Gettysburg College
Mhm.
and I haven't looked at it. So she went through, her parents paid for her. She was very, very lucky to have that. So we were just saddled with debt. But I believe, I have to check this, but last time I checked, it was about $70,000 a year to go there. And that's not even like the most expensive college in like the
Oh,
area. You can
no.
easily find ones that are more expensive. And it's just like at a certain point, like I have to think about when does the trend break, right? When college just gets more and more and more expensive. And so the optimist in me thinks that, on the operational side, if you make things really better and you have an institution that is running on the, again, operationally, at a fraction of the cost, like maybe we can start to bring costs down. And again, that might just be overly optimistic of me, or at least like have them plateau a little bit because
Mhm.
I have two kids. I have a 1-year-old and I have a 4-year-old. And man, when I think about that, like 1-year-old going to college in like 17 years or whatever, I
Mhm.
mean, if things keep going up, I'm gonna have to send $1 million a year for him to go to college. And I just it's hard to wrap my head around what that would look like if there's not something that bucks the trend. Maybe AI is it, maybe not. But I think that at the very least, we'll see institutions starting to play with it. And I think those innovative models, and I think we'll see them for programs. I also think we'll see them for colleges. That new
Mhm.
colleges as they pop up, colleges and universities that have AI, not just something that is there but something
It's,
that's embedded within them,
yeah,
I think that changes things.
I know in the States, there's a ton of schools. There's a lot of schools. We don't have as many schools in Canada. We also don't have the population, but still, we've got we've got a lot of schools, and with the immigration reform that is happening, we have to really, really focus on domestic enrollment, domestic recruiting. And those students, there's not as many of them as there used to be. And on top of that, there is the money. Last question I ask everybody. Let's say another school comes to you and they say to you, okay, listen, we're a small, mid-sized school. We don't have all the money in the world. We're trying to figure out what we do with AI. Yes, students are using it to prepare assignments, and there's some concern about all of that. Yes, it's really helpful. We have some co-curricular prompt engineering courses, etc. But this is all just pieces. What 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 are your views about two, three things that we must do in terms of AI to not just succeed this year or not just thrive or survive this year, but to position ourselves to move forward 5 years, 10 years? But we've got to do some stuff right now, and we don't have all the money in the world to do it. What should we be focused on?
Yeah, so I think that there is a multi-step process that you can start to create a strategy. And I think
Hmm.
that we are at that point where we need to, as I phrased it elsewhere in some of my writing, stop tinkering, right? The ER, especially on the level of the classroom, a lot of it's tinkering, having little pieces, which is good and helpful. And you can learn a lot from it. But now trying to think about the broad strategy. And there are three ways that we start doing this. Step number one, talk to your students. Like really, really find ways to talk to your students as much as you can. I don't think institutions spend nearly enough time on that student facing part. And I think that if we don't, it's going to be very, very likely that we misstep. So find a
Hmm.
way that you can get students um not just hearing them, not just giving their voice, but seeing if there is a space for them to start co-creating things for you, thinking about the value of the institution and the direction of the institution. And then I would say step number two on the institutional side, survey what is already happening. And this is again something I think that rarely happens. I think that an institution might ask individual professors what they're doing, and that's helpful. But really, what is admissions doing? What is recruitment doing? What isn't? And I think there, even from those two steps, you can start to create a strategy, right? Start to think about what the direction of your institution is. And then I would say step number three, give that strategy context. Look at what institutions are doing. So look, and if you're in the US, look at California State University. They just signed an agreement with OpenAI, and they have one model for doing it. A lot of the several colleges in the UK, especially Oxford University and others, just also signed another agreement with OpenAI. Look at what they are doing. So at this point, as you've gone through this three-step process, I think you have start to have a sense of your context, right? So if you want to, so the context for your strategy, because what you want to do is you'll have to sort of figure out where your mission, right, the mission of your institution fits within that. And I think that starts to give us a powerful picture of where we can actually go within the next few years. Because here is sort of the balance for a college or institution. You want to adapt. You want to pivot if you need to pivot, but also recognize that you have this foundation. You don't want to jeopardize that foundation. So if you have that mission statement, so for us, if I were creating a strategy and we were saying that, okay, we are here to get people jobs, right? We're here to prepare people for future careers, right? And so how do you approach that within that context? Because here's one of the things that I think that colleges tend to make a couple of mistakes. I think that one is not doing the groundwork. So this is where you're not talking to students, you're not talking to um, different departments and figuring out what they're doing. I think that's one mistake. Another mistake I see institutions sort of having or making is just following what other colleges do. Right. Because I think that's also a mistake. I think that if, as an institution approaching this, you want to think about yourself as having a value add, right? What
Right.
makes your institution different, right?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you might look at CSU and say, that's great. Let's follow them. Or you might say, oh my gosh, that is a terrible model for us. And that doesn't work. We're going to do this differently. But I think having that sense of purpose really, really does help. And especially in the US, colleges are so different. They're so
Yeah.
different how they
Yeah.
operate in terms of what they're doing, in terms of what their functions are, in terms of who their students are. And so I think that the more we ground our future plans in that sort of multi-step process, I think the better served we're going to be because I think a lot of institutions will go all in on those agreements. I think they'll do that. And then students don't want it, right? Or won't use it, or faculty
Yeah.
won't. And that's
Yeah.
you do not want to do that. That could be a crippling um,
Yeah.
step, if you a crippling action if you make it. And so you really want to prevent that. And a lot of that is making sure you're not modeling your institution off of other institutions unless you think it's a really, really, really good fit. Because I think that's going to be another sort of college killing move if you don't
Mhm.
really think about what makes us different. Because if you your brand needs to be different, and this is going to becoming more and more the case. There needs to be some value add that you have that makes you different from the school down the street or even across the country, right? Why are they coming to you? And I think that a lot of it is thinking about that purpose and really using that as we plan and develop. And this is a process that doesn't just go one, two, three. You have to constantly go back to the other steps, right?
Mhm.
Once you do it and you develop, then have those students talk to them, talk to the departments, bring in as many people as you can, and go from there, I would say.
Hey, thank you very much, Jay. I think you're really right on there where the context is very, very important. Um, Talking to students, listening to students, I think we all need to do that more, just generally. It's got to work for the school. It's got to work for the
Yeah.
school on one end. And on the other end, it's got to be more than just we're going to layer AI onto it's got to be both. Um, AI and how AI is integrated into the academic programs, but also in terms of just the college, is one of those things that's an experience. That's a something you're going to remember. That is such an important part of actually branding. Jason, I want to thank you very much for spending some time with us today and sharing your wisdom, your expertise. This is you run into so many people and there's so many different approaches and opinions about what this means and when it will happen, what will happen. And it's really something though that we've got to be thinking about so carefully. And as you've very much pointed out, we need to not think of it universally. We need to think of it very specifically and in context. For those who are watching the podcast, Jason's bio, any papers that he is interested in sharing, or links, will be in the biography below. If you like this type of programming, give a thumbs up or provide some feedback. If you have ideas that you'd like to hear more about, leave those comments in the below as well. So Jason, thanks so much. I hope we can get another chance to talk, because I suspect in about 2 days, a lot of things are going to have changed in this. And the change happens so quick. And
Thank you so much, David.
yeah, and to the remainder, the rest, have a lovely day. Thanks very much.
Thank you.